The ocean looked peaceful that morning. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and blue as the sun slowly rose above the horizon. Gentle waves rolled beneath the hull of a small fishing boat, drifting miles away from land. For Miguel Alvarez, mornings like this were the reason he had chosen a life at sea. Fishing had been in his family for generations. His father had taught him everything he knew about the ocean: how to read the wind, how to understand the movement of the waves, and how to respect the sea. "The ocean is beautiful," his father used to say, "but never forget that it can turn against you." Miguel had heard those words his entire life. But on that morning, the ocean looked harmless. His boat was small, barely large enough for one person, but it was reliable. The engine hummed softly as Miguel guided the vessel farther into open water, chasing the best fishing grounds he knew. Seagulls circled above him, occasionally diving toward the surface in search of fish. The air smelled of salt and sunlight. Everything felt normal, too normal. By mid-morning, Miguel noticed something strange. The wind had completely disappeared. The ocean surface, which usually moved with gentle waves, had become unusually still. It looked like a giant sheet of glass stretching across the horizon. Experienced fishermen knew that kind of silence. It often meant something was coming. Miguel glanced toward the distant sky. Far away, a dark wall of clouds was slowly rising above the horizon. A storm. At first, he wasn't too worried. Storms were common in open water, and most of them passed quickly. Miguel turned the boat around and started heading back toward the coastline. But the ocean had other plans. Within an hour, the wind returned, but this time it came back with terrifying force. The calm water transformed instantly into chaos. Waves began forming rapidly, growing larger with every passing minute. The once peaceful sky darkened as the storm swallowed the sunlight. Miguel pushed the engine harder, trying to outrun the approaching storm. But he quickly realized he wasn't going to make it. The first massive wave slammed into the side of the boat, sending a wall of freezing water across the deck. The engine sputtered briefly, but continued running. Lightning split the sky. Thunder followed like the roar of a giant. The storm surrounded him. Miguel fought desperately to control the small fishing boat as it climbed and dropped along the violent waves. The vessel felt tiny compared to the massive ocean rising around it. Then disaster struck. A powerful wave crashed directly over the engine compartment. The motor choked. For a few seconds, it struggled to keep running. Then it died. Silence. The only sound left was the terrifying roar of the storm. Miguel pulled the starter cord again and again, hoping the engine would return to life. Nothing happened. The boat was now completely at the mercy of the ocean. The storm lasted for hours. Miguel clung to the sides of the boat, as wave after wave slammed against it. Several times he thought the vessel would flip over completely, but somehow the little fishing boat survived. Eventually, the storm moved on. The wind slowly faded, the clouds broke apart, and once again, the ocean became quiet. But this time, the silence was terrifying. Miguel stood up slowly, his entire body shaking from exhaustion. The horizon stretched endlessly in every direction. There was no land in sight. The storm had carried him far into the open ocean. He tried the engine again, still dead. Miguel searched the boat carefully, hoping that he might repair the motor. But the storm had flooded the engine with seawater. Without tools or spare parts, fixing it was impossible. He was stranded, alone, miles from land. The first day passed slowly. Miguel tried to stay calm. Fishing boats occasionally passed through these waters. If he waited long enough, someone would eventually see him. But the ocean was enormous. and his boat was very small. On the second day, the sun became his biggest enemy. Without shade, the relentless heat burned his skin and drained his energy. The drinking water he had brought for the trip was limited. Miguel began rationing every drop. The nights were even worse. The ocean became dark and silent under the moonlight. Strange sounds echoed from the water below. Occasionally, something large would move beneath the boat, creating ripples on the surface. Miguel tried not to imagine what might be swimming under him. By the fourth day, hunger and dehydration began taking their toll. Miguel forced himself to fish, using whatever equipment remained on the boat. It was difficult, but eventually he managed to catch a small fish. It wasn't much, but it kept him alive. Days blended together. Sunrise, heat, night, cold, endless ocean. Sometimes Miguel thought he saw ships on the horizon, but when he looked closer, they always disappeared. Mirages. His mind was starting to play tricks on him. On the seventh day, something appeared in the water. A large, dark fin cut through the surface beside the boat. Then another. Sharks. They circled slowly beneath the drifting vessel, curious about the lone human floating above them. Miguel stayed perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. For hours, the sharks followed the boat. Eventually, they disappeared into the depths, but the fear remained. Miguel was growing weaker. His lips were cracked from dehydration. His muscles ached constantly, and the sun had turned his skin deep red. Still, he refused to give up. Every morning, he stood up in the boat and searched the horizon. Every night, he whispered a quiet promise to himself: survive one more day. On the 12th day, something incredible happened. Miguel heard a faint sound in the distance. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the noise grew louder, a deep mechanical rumble. Engines. Miguel stood up instantly, scanning the horizon, and then he saw it. Far away, cutting through the blue water, was a large cargo ship. His heart exploded with hope. Miguel grabbed a bright piece of cloth from his fishing equipment and began waving it frantically in the air. He shouted until his voice turned hoarse. For several terrifying minutes, nothing happened. The cargo ship continued moving forward, then suddenly, it slowed down. The massive vessel slowly changed direction. It was coming toward him. Miguel collapsed to his knees as relief washed over him. After 12 days drifting alone in the endless ocean, someone had finally seen him. When the crew of the ship pulled him aboard, they stared in disbelief at the exhausted fisherman who had somehow survived nearly 2 weeks alone at sea. Miguel looked back toward the endless horizon one last time. The ocean was calm again, beautiful, peaceful, but he knew the truth now. The sea could change at any moment, and anyone who ventured into its depths had to be ready for the moment it decided to test their will to survive.